This is video 1 of our table series in Microsoft Access, and we're going to learn how we're going to create a database and create our first table and just change a couple of features with that table. So I'm going to go to Microsoft Access. I'm going to open it up so we can start creating our first table. So we'll see when we open up Access, the first thing it's going to do is if we open up a current database, or do we want to create a blank database. We're going to say I want to create a blank database, so I want to click on that option, and then I want to specify, before you save it and give it a name, it's a good idea to say where you want to save it. Do you definitely want to save it in that area? So I'm going to go and select a location quickly for where I want to save it by clicking on the browse option, and then when that pops up I can go to the right whichever place I want to save it. So when I clicked on that little icon over there, this box pops up. You can say where you want to save it. I'm going to save it on my desktop. You give it a nice little name, and here's a little feature. You can save it as older formats if you want. Some of you doing IT, if you want to save it to an MDB, maybe for your Delphi project, you want to save it as the 2003 format, but I'm going to keep it as ACC for now. So that's where I'm going to save it on my desktop, and that's the name I'm going to give it. I'm going to click OK, and then that'll change all those details there, and all I have to do is click on create, and therefore I will have my first database open when it finally opens. There we go, and it will automatically try to ask you to make a table. Okay, so now it's asking me to do it via the datasheet view. I want to rather go to design view, so I'm going to go to design view. It's probably going to ask me to save it first. Okay, so I'm going to give it a name, so let's give it TBL data. Okay, so TBL data, that's the name of my table. I call it TBL because if I got reports or queries, I'm going to give them a different prefix so that I know the difference between what's the table for the data and what's a report for the data. So I will call it TBL data. And here it tries to give me the field names and what type must go into that field name. This is basically this is the way that we're going to set up these columns at the top, what is going to be at the column and what type of data is going to be in them. So let's go back to the design view. So I'm going to straight away, I don't want this, that's already there. I'm going to delete that row. I don't want that. So we'll just delete that. Yes, we'll come to that later. So let's start off with our first name. I'm going to type in the name of my field. Try to keep it to one word. So keep no spaces, and if you need spaces, either put it together or put underscores. So I'm going to put first name. Now here under data type, I can select what type of data is going to go in there. So there's a whole list of options. So let's talk about what those options are. So we have different fields, and we can have different types of data that are stored in those fields. And the most common type of data that we'll store in them is short text. So when we've got anything that's limited to 255 characters, maybe a surname, a job title, a phone number. Now, some of you are thinking phone number, that's like a number, but I'll come back to the phone number while we store it as a text. But basically anything that's limited to 255 characters or less. So most of the time you're going to use short text. If you need something that's a bit longer than short text, then there's the long text option. Or not the Mr. Long Text, but the long text option. And those are for entries that are longer than 255 characters. Maybe there's some notes or some detailed explanations or like a review that's going to be quite a few paragraphs. Then you maybe want to use the long text. It allows for more options there. Then we have a number. Now, that's any number that is used for a mathematical calculation. And the reason why I said we don't use a phone number as a number is because a lot of the times you want a particular format for the phone number. Maybe you want like the international format of +27, and that's better to use as text. Also, you're never going to do mathematical calculations on a phone number. You're never going to take all the phone numbers and +3 onto them or find the average phone number. You just need it as a set of numbers. So that's why we keep that as a text. Also because sometimes your phone number has a 0 in front. And if you make it a number, then it's going to take that 0 away, whatever, if it's in the front. So if 072 will become 72. But if you want to keep that 0 there, you need to keep it as short text. So numbers for anything that you want to keep for like what grade you're in maybe, or if you want to find how many times someone broke a record, some sort of detail like that. That's a number you would use for your data type for that. Then we have a date or time. That's the moment you want to store a date and time, or both, or one or the other. Then you would use this option, like for a birth date, or maybe the day that you started at a company. These are all options for date and time. Currency, it's similar to number, but this is normally for monetary value. So like for your salary or for payments or anything to do with money, you can use the currency format. And then we have auto number. Now, auto number automatically assigns a unique number to each record. So it gives each, so it starts with 1, and then the next record will be a 2 and 3. Gives each one a unique number. That's important for later on when we talk about primary keys. We'll get to that at another point. But you can set it to an auto number, and it will automatically do that part for you. Now, if you thought that was it, no, those are all nice options there, but there are more. So let's look at the other options you have available. These ones are, you have a yes or no option, which is like a Boolean, which means it's either true or false or yes or no. So maybe you've got a question like, do they have medical aid? It's either yes or no. So then you use the yes or no option. It looks like a little tick or a no tick, like a checkbox. Then you can have the OLE object. That's if you've got like a photo or a music file, sometimes a media, anything like that from another program. You can store that. Maybe you want their profile picture as part of your database. You can use the OLE object for that. And then you have a hyperlink, which can be used to have a link or show you the address, web address for a particular web page, or maybe you're storing a document online. Attachment, that is for any other file that's not supported by the OLE object, maybe like it's a Word document or something like that. But also if you've got multiple files, you can also use the attachment. And then the calculator one, you can run a calculation based on particular formulas or equations or other fields. It's not always best to use that over here. We try to use them mainly in the queries, but you can do a calculated field in a table. So there you go. Those are all the data field types that you can have in your database, and we're going to go and create a couple of them now quickly. So we had first name. I'm going to add a surname now, and we're going to make that also a short text. So it's by default short text. Maybe I want a birth date as an option, and I'm going to make that as a date. So there we go. So as you go, you keep typing in your field names, and you keep giving them the data type, and you can see all the options available to you. So I'm going to go ahead and create the rest of this table, and then we'll work on it later. So there I've gone ahead and created a whole bunch of fields, and you can see I've got a whole bunch of different types, like are they married? That's a yes or no. The paid and outstanding are currencies, and the number of payments is a number. So we've got a whole range of options here. You'll see my contact number is a short text because I want to keep the leading 0 there. So there we go. We've got a nice little table developed here. Now if I go to the datasheet view, remember always make sure that you save. And if I go to datasheet view, yeah, I can start entering the values for my table and just populating it with the information that I need. Now, if I go back to design view, there are going to be some properties that I want to learn about, and that's where we're going to be focusing on for the next couple of videos with regard to tables. But let's just start with a couple of them quickly now. So let's start off with the first field property we want to talk about, and that's the field size. Now, we can set the maximum size for a field. Now, as we said, the short text has a 255 character limit. Now, that's enough space for whatever we're looking for. But something to take note of, if you're storing like a cell phone number or a phone number, you only need like 10 characters for that, or 10 or maybe 11 or 12, depending on what the format is that you want to display it. You don't need 255. Now, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but what's happening is if you leave it to 255, it's going to allocate that much space for that cell phone number for each record. Now, for one record, it's not a big deal, but when we start getting to 1,000 records, to 10,000 records, to 100,000 records, now that space is adding up. And our database is getting quite big. So we want to try and be efficient with our field sizes so that we can not make our database too big. So like, for example, we could limit the size of a cell phone number. We can also limit the size of a name. We're not going to use 255 characters for a name. Maybe 30 is enough. It depends on what you want. So you pick the right amount that's adequate, that's more than enough, but it can still be significant improvement on 255 characters. So that's what you would use for your field size. You can also use it not only on text, but on the number field. So you can specify what type of number can go in there. So for example, there is a number called a byte, which can only take a number from 0 to 255. Now that's nice because if you're wanting, for example, a rating from 1 to 10, you would rather use that because it uses, again, less space than a normal number that might take that can take bigger numbers, a bigger range of possibilities. So that's just a way to make your database more efficient. The other property we can look at is the format, is how the data must be displayed. And we can use that for the number. For example, we want to see it in scientific notation, for example, maybe. Or we want the date and time to be a particular format. So you want the date or the month, for example, to be in text, not just to say 03, but to say March. Or the yes/no field. Do you want it to say the word yes, no, or do you want it to be a checkbox? So you can change how the data is displayed by changing the format. Then you can change the default value. Now the default value is whenever you add a new record, it automatically gives it a default value and allocates a value to it. You can change that record. It's not set in stone, but it just makes your data entry a lot easier. If you enter in a lot of values and you keep on adding the same value to the same field every single time, then why just have that value by default so that you can just skip over that every single time? It just saves you time. For example, let's take, for example, a high school. If you were entering new students into your database every year at the beginning of the year, you would probably set the default grade to grade 8 because most of your new students would be grade 8s. So then just set it to 8. And so every time you put in a new record, it's already 8. You don't need to enter that in. And then if you get the occasional new student that's in grade 10 or grade 11, you can just change it. But you only change it for those 1 or 2 exceptional cases. So you can change the default value. And then the other property I want to talk about is the required property. And now that's a compulsory field, a field that must have a value. So you know when you go onto a website and you fill in data and it's got that red star saying you must fill this in, that's the same thing here. We want to make sure that this field cannot be blank. Okay, so there are our field properties. So let's go see how we can adapt them to our table. So here we go. We've got our table here. Field first name. We can click on first name and we can see the field size is 255. Now let's try and make it 30. Let's save some space here. And we could do the same for the surname. Maybe we don't want surnames of bigger than 30. Division. In this case, our division is either going to be an A, B, or C. So we're never going to need more than one character. So let's just make it one character. Contact number. Let's make it 12 if you want it to be, just to be sure. So that way you're changing the field sizes of that. Now let's go down to number of payments, and you can change the field size. And there you can specify, hey, I want it to be a byte or an integer or a Mr. Long integer. No, just a long integer. And that tells you like each of those use up a different amount of space to store it. So we can specify what type of number. Let's say they'll never need more than 255 payments, so we'll make it a byte, for example. So there is the field size. Now the other one was the format. Now we can change, for example, a number format. So there's the format for a number, and you can specify what type of format it is. So there you can see. We can go to our date time. Over here is our date time. We can change its format. You can specify what it must look like, a medium date or a short date or a Mr. Long date. A long date. So you can specify that. And the checkbox. If we go view this field, we can just make sure we save. Boom. Make sure you save. You can see we've got a little checkbox there for married. Maybe we don't want that to look like a checkbox. So if we come to design view, now checkbox is slightly different. You can specify a yes or no, or true or false, or on or off. You can also go to the lookup option and say what it must look like, if it must be a checkbox or a text box or a combo box. So you can also do that over there. So there we go. So there's those. That was the format, and then the default value. Let's say most people are in division A. So then for division, I'm going to make the default value an A. And so what that means is whenever I go here to my table, you'll see there's already an A put in as default. So every time a new record, A will automatically be there. And let's say, you know what, we definitely need you to have an email address, or we definitely need to know what city you were born in, or we definitely need to contact you. If we want to contact you, you see this required field. If you want to make it compulsory, just make it a yes. And we definitely want you to have a city. You must be born, we need to know where you are. So we're going to make that a yes as well. So you can do things like that if you wanted to. I'm going to change that to a no. But those are things that you can do for those fields. Now, the final aspect of a table that I want to talk about is the primary key. Now, they normally recommend that your tables have a primary key. Now, what is a primary key? Well, it's a unique identifier. It's a field or combination of fields that can uniquely identify every row. And they really encourage you to have that in your database tables so that they can find each record individually if you need to. So when you have a primary key, there's normally 2 rules that you need to follow when you are trying to determine which field is the best field for a primary key. The first rule is it must be unique. You can't have 2 records with the same primary key. Okay, so that's a very important rule that you need to remember because it's a unique identifier. And the second rule is that it cannot be empty. You can't have someone with no primary key. Okay, so because if you have too many people with no primary keys, then that's actually duplicating it. So it must be unique and it can't be empty. So there are other rules, but those are the 2 main rules. If you can consider those 2 rules, it'll help you a lot to try to find out which field is the best field to be a primary key. Now, if we take our table that we've got over here, so the way I do it is I go through and ask myself the question, like, can you have two people with the same first name? And the answer is yes, it's possible. So therefore, rule one, it must be unique. So first name can't be a primary key. Neither can surname. Two people could have the same surname. People could be born on the same birth date. Two people could be in the same division. Could two people have the same contact number? Probably not. So that's a potential. But is it possible that someone does not have a contact number? If it's possible that they don't have a contact number, then you can't use it as a primary key, because remember, the rule 2, it can't be empty. So those are things that you've got to ask yourself. If you've got a situation where everyone must have a contact number, then that would be a suitable primary key. Same with email. Everyone should have a unique email address. And if you say it's compulsory that you have one, then you could use that as your primary key. But let's pretend it's not. Married, definitely not. The two people could be born in the same city. Staff ID, that's a nice one. That's probably going to be unique for everyone, and everyone will have one. So that would probably be the best case scenario for this table. If you find through your fields that you don't have one, then you would probably need to create one. But in this case, we know that staff ID will be our primary key. Now, you do get a situation like this where, let's say, we're keeping track of trips in a day for a company. They've got drivers that go out and they take the cars out for different trips. And we've got a database where we've got a table here where we store the date of the trip, the car's registration number, the driver who took the trip, and the total kilometers and the fill up. Now, in this case, it's a bit more difficult because none of these fields are actually appropriate primary keys. There could be more than one trip on a particular day. The same car could be used multiple times. The same driver could be used multiple times. And the total kilometers and filled up could easily be the same value. So in this case, there's two options. You're either going to create a primary key. So we would make like a trip ID. And this is where you would make it into like an auto number maybe. So it will always, every time you add a record, it'll go 1, 2, 3. So that's a good option for auto number. But if you don't want to do that, you can make your own custom primary key, call it trip ID, and you make it your own special code. Another option is to make what's called a composite primary key. So although one field by itself is not unique, a combination of two or more fields could be unique. So for example, in this case, although there could be two trips on the same day, and although a car could be used multiple times, no car will be used multiple times on the same day. So if we combine the date of the trip and the car registration, that would be unique because no unique car will be taken out on the same day. So if you use one car, that's it, it's used for the day. So there will never be on the 26th of March 2021, car CC1 will never be used twice on that day. So that will always be unique. So in that case, you could make them both a primary key. So how do we make something a primary key? Well, let's go to the database table. So here we go. We want to make something a primary key. It's very easy to do. You just click on the field that you want to make a primary key. Let's make staff ID. And there's a primary key option there. You just click on it. And now there's a key there. And that's it. That is literally all you have to do. Another way of doing it, you can also right click on it and set it to primary key. And you can also click there to deselect it. Okay, if you want to make a composite primary key, then you just select a whole bunch of fields and then click on primary key. But in this case, that's definitely not a good primary key. We just want staff ID to be the primary key. Okay, so that's how you make a primary key. We're going to continue with tables in our next video, in this video series. But to go view other videos on Access and Excel, go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, click on the like button. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment. And remember, don't do it the long way. Do it the Mr. Long way.